I think we're finally at the place where we're going to see real transactions, real value start flowing from the world's largest multi-trillion dollars in assets under management banks and institutions, initially between each other, but then eventually also between them and public chains. My name is Sergey Nazarov. I'm the co-founder of Chainlink, which is the largest decentralized Oracle network system that's enabled over 10.5 trillion in transaction value so far, and powers a lot of cross-chain, data, compute, all the things needed to make more advanced smart contracts. So yeah, I'm here in Dubai, happy to be here, really interesting place, lots of activity, lots of innovation, lots of people building things that are on the cutting edge, which is the reason I like to work on infrastructure, is to enable those people to build those cutting edge things in a way that is secure, reliable, and allows them to build them in a more interesting, more useful way. So for me, it's just great to meet all the people building these more advanced real world assets, DeFi 2.0 contracts, all of these kind of more advanced things on chain. It's just great for me to meet with all these people and learn what they're building, so I can help build even better infrastructure for them to build the next generation of their applications. And B, it's just very interesting what's getting built.
Thank you very much. And we're here at the RWA Summit in Dubai, and I'd like to start as broadly as possible. So what are the benefits of tokenization as you see them?
So the benefits of tokenization fall between the ability to do atomic settlement, the ability to manage collateral more efficiency, basically the ability to manage assets and move assets in a more efficient way, whether that's having a 24/7, 365 market, whether that's managing collateral in a way that it isn't in limbo and so you lose 2 or 3 days of interest payments on a few $100 billion, whether it's the ability to do atomic settlement where we can do a transaction that's concluded in a second instead of 3 days. There are these kind of transactional and asset management, collateral management problems that through basic tokenization are solved for a greater and greater percentage of the financial system. I think eventually all the value in the financial system will be in a tokenized form because it's a simply superior format for that value to exist in from a control point of view, efficiency point of view, security point of view, and so on. Then there's another aspect of tokenization, which is the ability to create what we call a unified golden record. Unified golden record is basically the ability to have an ownership receipt and data in that ownership receipt about the relevant asset, right? So in the traditional world, you have the value transfer system and the data system about the asset, telling you about the asset as two totally separate worlds. So in the traditional world, I will give you the ownership rights through some kind of ownership receipt, through a CSD or some centralized system. And that ownership right then conveys to you the right to own that thing, or the economic benefit in some cases. But it then gives you the responsibility of figuring out the data around that asset. So now you're responsible for figuring out, is that asset solvent? Is that asset still good? Is that asset under additional debt obligations? What is the credit rating of the asset? So on and so on. The new model that's now being introduced, the model of a unified golden record, is the ability to merge the ownership rights and the data about the underlying into a single thing, a smart contract, that holds the relevant data and keeps being updated. And so this is what Chainlink provides. Base tokenization is provided by a blockchain, and the ability to turn that base token into a unified golden record with all of this critical data inside of it is provided by Chainlink, because Chainlink is the mechanism through which all of that data is initially put into the on-chain record, and the way it's continually updated, so that if something changes about the asset, the on-chain record reflects that. And this is a very big shift because historically, in order to buy a carbon credit, in order to buy a piece of real estate, in order to buy a certain type of credit instrument, you would actually need to know quite a bit about it, and you would need to know where to go to understand what's going on with that instrument or that asset at that time. And many people don't simply have the ability to do that. Now, simply by owning the asset, you get all the relevant data about its risk, how it's changing, whether it's operating correctly or not, whether the risk profile of the asset has changed, which is a very, very big shift. So there's these two categories of value that tokenization provides.
Thank you. And just on that shift that you're describing there, what impact do you see it having on traditional finance?
I mean, I think it'll have a massive impact because all of the value in traditional finance, everything from the equities industry, commodities, derivatives, private equity, all of this will eventually be tokenized. And that is a once in a 50-year shift in how value is formatted and managed. So the last shift was going from paper into Web 1 and Web 2 formatting of value, namely digital, right? So you went from paper documents to digital documents in the form of database records within Web 1, Web 2 systems. Now, that happened over the course of the last 30, 40, 50 years. Now you have a once in a few generations shift of going from this digital format to this highly reliable digital format known as blockchains and smart contracts. And so the first thing that'll happen is that the reformatting of this value will get you all those 24/7, 365 markets, atomic settlement, better collateral management, lower risk, and so on. The second category will be the ability to understand the status of assets in almost a real-time, or in many cases, a real-time fashion. And if you look at the systemic financial system failures, what they basically boil down to is information asymmetries, where one group, like the asset issuer, was very educated about the asset, and they knew that the underlying mortgages were not good, and so they didn't buy them, but they sold them. And the rest of the market didn't have access to the relevant data about the underlying mortgages. They couldn't figure out were the underlying mortgages good or were they bad, and they ceded that responsibility to someone else who didn't do a good job, and all these problems. So the reality of the situation is not only do you get all of these efficiencies, but you get a massively improved way to manage risk. And the financial markets are a constant struggle between risk and return. Like these two dimensions are constantly in conflict of how much return do I want for how much risk. So if a system not only becomes more efficient, but allows you to manage risk and return at a superior kind of technical, efficient way, then it's just like a monumental shift in how everything works. The question is, what categories of assets does it happen in first, second, third? And that's kind of what's being debated now, but it's not being debated in the sense of just a conversation. It's being debated by people that are making real world asset tokens, banks are making their own blockchains, people are shipping various on-chain assets that didn't exist before. And in doing so, they're testing what reality is. And what we do is we enable them to test what reality is by providing the infrastructure needed to generate those assets, needed to move them across chain. And so I've never seen this much activity in that respect. So I think it's going very much in the right direction.
How do you think implementing cross-chain is going to change the way tokenization is perceived?
Yeah, so cross-chain I think is one of the key building blocks of how the real-world asset trend and tokenization in general will develop. You have two worlds where it's developing simultaneously. You have the public blockchain world, where people are generating many cutting-edge real-world assets, but where the amount of value flowing through tokenization is much, much smaller than the other world of capital markets, banks, and traditional asset managers. So in the Web3 world, the problem is, how do you connect in a secure way that makes sure that the asset moved over the bridge doesn't get stolen, and if the asset moved over the bridge has a high likelihood of being stolen, which is what I think people are going to realize more and more when they look at the actual security designs of bridges other than Chainlink and CCIP, then those assets will begin to carry a risk premium. They will begin to be viewed as worse assets because they are exposed to the risk of various bridge technologies, which are in many ways fundamentally insecure. So the problem in Web3 is generating enough security to allow enough value to move across various public chains in ways that raise the overall purchasing power, liquidity, TVL, and basically usability and value of tokenization across all these different chains, right? So it's largely a security problem. The capital markets is a place where you have a lot of fragmentation. Every bank is generating its own chain. Every asset manager is generating its own chain. And this technical fragmentation is leading to fragmentation of liquidity. In fragmented liquidity, you really have a very serious problem where even if you make a successful real-world asset or token on one of those bank chains, and you're not connected to all the chains that have the liquidity, you're not going to get the purchasing power, you're not going to get the success that you're looking for. So the first problem is, how do you securely connect Web3, which is what CCIP was launched to address? How do you securely move value across different chains in Web3? Now, there's a lot of people migrating to CCIP basically because they evaluated the security and can very clearly see that the security is superior, and they value the security of their underlying assets, so they kind of really care about that. In capital markets, CCIP is being adopted by more and more banks, asset managers, market infrastructures, financial market infrastructures, and so on, to connect all those different chains and therefore package all of that liquidity into a single network that can move it across all the different chains. Now, the third problem is, how do you merge these two worlds of the connected Web3 world and the connected capital markets world into a single Internet of Contracts, where the capital markets value can interact with a DeFi Web3 tokenized value? That is really more a problem of compliance, and how does a cross-chain connection allow compliance to happen, initially across the bank chains and eventually across the bank chains and the public chains. But that is really where all of this is going. It's going to a single global Internet of Contracts, where all of the public chains and all of the private chains are interconnected with each other. And if a high quality asset appears on any one of them, they can all interact with it in a compliant, high speed, secure way. So that's the body of work we're creating with Chainlink and CCIP.
Okay, and staying on Chainlink and the sort of developments that you guys have been working on, can you share some updates from the last 6 months and what it's been like sort of coming out of a bear market?
I mean, the updates I would say are that it's picking up in terms of, everything's picking up in terms of usage again. And I think there are parts of the Chainlink system that are able to scale and provide all of the data and other aspects that people need to build applications. And then there are other parts of the Chainlink system that are kind of in the process of being deployed and are connecting to more places and are scaling up to meet that demand. But generally, I would say the demand is increasing, and Chainlink is kind of keeping up with servicing the necessary demand for Web3, DeFi, RWA, whether that's on the basis of data or connectivity.
Dubai is positioning itself as a global hub for both technological innovations like tokenization and also blockchain infrastructure. And I'm curious what you think is driving this movement.
I think there are certain parts of the world, like Singapore, Hong Kong, and Dubai, that create a neutral commercial environment that turns them into a hub. A shipping hub, a financial hub, and in this case, a blockchain technology hub. And I think those places are very focused on being those hubs because that's kind of one of the main purposes that they see themselves as serving in the world, and how they see themselves differentiating what they are from all the other countries and so on. I think Dubai has done a very, very good job of that. It's been very, very impressive to see what's come about here in the last 20 years. I was reading about it before I got here, and just seeing it in person is very, very impressive. It's not every day that you see something like this come together. And this amount of smart, thoughtful people being in a kind of collaborative environment where they're encouraged to do their best work, and they're not stifled or made to be fearful when they're building, the next generation of technology for how the world will work. And I think Dubai has done a very good job of that. I'm very impressed.
And on that note, I know you recently had a fireside chat with Dr. Marwan Al-Zaruni. He's considered a bit of a pioneer in Dubai and the UAE. I'm curious if you can share some of the insights from that conversation. What did you talk about? What did he talk about? And what sort of emerged from that chat?
Yeah, so Dr. Marwan is a very smart guy that's very, very thoughtful about both the historical context of our industry and so the decisions that were made in the past, and also the future of our industry and the decisions and the problems that need to be solved for in the future. Generally, I feel like we arrived at a lot of agreement about how the industry got to the place it is at and where the industry needs to go next. A lot of that agreement centered on the need for the industry to interact in a compliant way with the capital markets, with the world's banks and asset managers, so it can graduate to the next level, a larger amount of value, and so on. So that's basically the next step. So we're kind of at a place where the industry is fluctuating between $1.5 to $2.5 trillion in value. mean, that's a great place to be because when I started in this industry, I think it was like sub 100 million total or something. So it was like a very, very small amount. So it's great, but you always need to be looking towards what's next. I think the general crypto community, the average users out there, maybe we'll get the crypto industry to 10 trillion, but I don't think they'll get it beyond that. And the only people that'll get it beyond that are the banks and the asset managers by allowing the value from those systems to flow into the crypto industry in general. That's, I think, a point of agreement that we clearly had. And so I think that's also born out of his experience in working with both groups. That's experience that I think is important because we're not trying to build a single, like a standard just for Web3 or a standard just for the bank world. We're trying to build a standard for how the whole world interacts on the basis of a data transmission layer and a value and data transmission layer for everything into, out of, and between chains. And so our system actually needs to understand everything about the Web3 world and the capital market world, and actually even about how those two worlds will interact. And I think he saw that as a logical approach, and that an infrastructure that solves those problems needs to exist.
Thank you. And you mentioned there some of the challenges that need to be overcome. I'm curious what you think the major hurdles that stand in the way of broader adoption of technologies like tokenization and RWAs generally is, and how exactly you're working on that.
So we're working on a subset of those problems. One of the main problems is still the crypto world user experience. The crypto world user experience provides a different level of control, but it does not excel at usability. So that is not a problem that we work on. That is a very fundamental problem that I think is going to be solved maybe through mobile phones, maybe through shared keys, maybe through a number of aspects that we're not solving. That's on the retail consumer side of the crypto market adoption, kind of part of the life cycle of how more value will flow into the system. We solve a lot of back-end infrastructure and data formatting, data standardization, connectivity, kind of the problem of the pipes of how everything actually works when you need to get data into a chain, out of a chain, when you need to connect chains, when you need to connect systems like Swift to chains, when you need to connect exchanges, existing exchange systems to chains. How does the whole world's infrastructure, data infrastructure, payments infrastructure, financial transactional infrastructure, how does that interface with chains in an efficient way, especially when interfacing with chains is not about interfacing with one chain, but interfacing with thousands of chains. So how does all the world's existing systems interface with chains? How does value get on chains in a way that's connected back to those systems and stays synchronized with them, whether that's proof of reserves about the underlying asset, whether that's price data, whether that's connection back to a backend. And then how do all of these different contracts and systems that house the contracts in the form of blockchains interoperate, both on the basis of data and on the basis of value, which is now being merged through CCIP into the ability to send data and value in a very connected way. And so these are very kind of low-level, open source standards, kind of pipe infrastructure questions that need to be solved in order for the people at this RWA summit, the people at DeFi conferences, the people at GameFi conferences to build the next generation of assets, to connect them across chains, to connect them to existing sources of liquidity like banks. These are kind of fundamental infrastructure problems, which we're very excited to work on. And I'm always very excited to see what people build on top of in a secure way. And I think that's one of the key aspects of what we provide is a system that's enabled over $10.5 trillion worth of transaction value that's been secure.
There's quite a few topics that we touched on there. I'm curious, on a personal note, out of all the things that you're working on, which one excites you the most? Which one really makes you want to get out of bed and work on the hard problems, whether it's the maths or interfacing between the different departments? What's most exciting on your plate?
I think for the most exciting thing, due to confidentiality requirements with the people I'm working with, I probably can't disclose everything. I think the thing that I would say is that the ability to connect the world's largest financial infrastructures into a single internet of contracts that can onboard tens of trillions of dollars in value into the blockchain format, if that is something that we can play a role in, will be a industry-changing type of set of events. So it would be very interesting to see the same standards allowing Web3 to operate, allowing the bank chain world to operate, and eventually allowing those two worlds to interoperate. That's kind of the end state of our industry, in my opinion. Just like the internet is full of different internet technologies that are connected to each other through TCP/IP, relying on different pieces of data for identity, for price, and all of that is flowing over that same TCP/IP kind of infrastructure. So I think at a general level, the most exciting thing would be the rebuilding of the current financial system in a way that not only does it work better, but it interoperates with Web3 eventually, forming a single internet of contracts on a single set of data transmission, value transmission, and off-chain kind of trust minimization frameworks and standards.
And how might this end state that you're describing be beneficial for individuals versus institutions in your mind?
Yeah, so I mean, it's massively beneficial to individuals because they will have private key control over their assets rather than simply having passwords to systems that people could deny them usage of at any moment. They will, in developed markets, have less systemic financial failures because information about the system will flow very efficiently. So like the 2008 financial crisis, things like that should not happen nearly as much. And in emerging markets, they will go from 0 to 1 in terms of a functioning economic system, in the sense that today it's very hard to save money, it's very hard to transact, it's very hard to engage in global trade, it's very hard to have insurance. In many cases, impossible to have any of those because the emerging countries' legal system doesn't facilitate an infrastructure or legal infrastructure that allows, bank accounts, global transactions, insurance, those things. So just like the telecom industry took people that had no landline to having a mobile phone, and just like the internet took people from having no paper books to having access to the same information I have over a mobile phone, they read the same Wikipedia article I read. This will take basically the whole world, from parts of the world that are developed in how their economy works, parts of the world that can't be developed because their legal system doesn't work, to everybody is basically on the same system of contracts. And that is irrespective of the underlying legal system. It'll also be irrespective of their language. Like, you won't need to rely on a relationship or a legal system to guarantee the integrity of transactions between people. You will only need to rely on mathematics, similarly to how private key ownership of a token only relies on mathematics to guarantee ownership of that thing. That's unrelated to any person's decision, right? Like, you have a private key, you control the thing. Imagine if you had a smart contract for crop insurance that if it doesn't rain and your crops die, you automatically get paid out. And there's no reliance on your legal system. There's no person that can change that outcome. If it rains, you don't get paid. If it doesn't rain, you do get paid. That's the kind of thing that can be, I think, very world-changing for people's lives, similarly to how telecommunications and the internet was world-changing for their lives.
Thank you very much. And I want to ask you if you have any final remarks on the state of the industry, the future of the industry, Chainlink, RWAs, anything you'd like to share with us?
I think that the cyclical nature of our industry is both a positive and a negative. I think now the cyclical nature of the industry is relatively positive, but what's very important is for people that get into this industry to understand that they should ignore the cyclical nature of the industry. They should focus on what is actually being created in this industry, despite it having a cyclical kind of pattern. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think it's important to take security very seriously, because our industry will be defined by its ability to secure value over time. Because people will not put tens of trillions of dollars in value into an industry that can't secure it, where people have failures where they lose 50 billion here, 20 billion there. Not a realistic expectation for us to have as an industry. So the ability for everyone to maintain high security standards, to have infrastructure that's secure, is important. And then the other thing I would say is that I think we are now finally, I've been working with the capital markets, banks, asset managers in the traditional world for over 7 years. For example, Swift, we've been publicly working with them for over 7 years. I think we're finally at the place where we're going to see real transactions, real value start flowing from the world's largest multi-trillion dollars in assets under management banks and institutions, initially between each other, but then eventually also between them and public chains. So I think we're kind of at the beginning of that chapter in the crypto markets, starting sometime last year, now forming more clearly this year, and I think really getting going next year. So I think it's a very exciting time because that chapter is a later stage chapter in how this industry will develop into its end state, which is securing all the value in the world in the blockchain format, and eventually also securing all relationships in the smart contract format, all digital economic relationships, which includes gaming, ad networks, global trade, finance, whatever. So it's pretty exciting, I think, where we are. And there's a lot of work left to do, but I think doing it is worthwhile.
Sergey, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.